It all started with a single pimple too on my left cheek, large enough to notice, small enough to disregard. I ignored it and continued brushing my teeth. I made sure to wash my face very thoroughly and went down to my car to drive to school. But as I was backing out of the driveway, I noticed something in the rearview mirror that made me pause. There was another pimple, slightly smaller, nestled right next to the first one. It honestly freaked me out a bit. I was pretty sure that wasn't there before, but I reassured myself that there was no way a pimple could grow that fast. I must have just missed it in the bathroom. By the time I pulled into the school parking lot, the pimples had multiplied into a little cluster. About a dozen little orbs of pus stuck to my face. I decided then and there that something was wrong. I skipped first period and went straight to the nurse's office. They just came out of nowhere. I know it may seem very sudden, but acne is a completely normal thing for kids your age. This isn't necessarily a typical case of acne, but it's not immediately concerning. I would recommend improving your personal hygiene routine. And if the problem doesn't go away, you should set up an appointment with a dermatologist. She dug around in her cabinet for a moment. Here, she said, handing me a large band-aid. You can cover it up with this. As I walked to class, I removed the band-aid from its wrapper and carefully stuck it over the cluster of zits. I felt a swell of embarrassment. I probably looked ridiculous. I worried people would stare at me and laugh. When I opened the door to Mr. Whitler's history class, everyone fell silent and turned towards me. I was half right. People were staring, but nobody was laughing. I felt my face flush red with embarrassment. My throat burned and I bit back tears. I quickly looked down and hurried off to my desk. I pulled my hood over my head and my head on my desk. It was a solid 20 seconds before anyone spoke. Mr. Whitler nervously cleared his throat. As I was saying, the Native Americans alleged that the United States had violated their treaty by allowing settlers past. Most of my classmates' attention had turned back to Mr. Whitler, but I could feel a couple gazes straggle on me. I already knew that the reaction I got wasn't just because of a silly-looking band-aid. But that didn't stop my heart from sinking into my stomach as I snuck a peek at my face in the warped reflection of the metallic table leg. The entire left side of my face was covered in clusters of angry red zits. From the bottom of my jaw to just above my eyebrow, my skin was entirely composed of pimples, none of them more than 1/10 of an inch apart. I looked like a mutated, deformed monster from some old movie. I started to feel lightheaded. I waited for class to end. It felt like forever. I didn't look at my reflection for the rest of my class, because I worried that if I did, I would burst out into tears and draw even more attention to myself. When the bell rang, I pushed past everyone else and quickly walked to my car, keeping my head down the entire time. I knew that by the time I got to the car, I would see that my face had gotten much worse. But when I got onto the jet black asphalt of the parking lot, I realized how much worse it was without even seeing my reflection. You know how when you close one of your eyes, you can see your nose at the edge of your vision? And it looks out of focus and blurry, and it obscures your vision a bit. My vision was obscured by tiny blurry dots around my eyes, like specks of dirt around the frames of your glasses. I reached up to my face and felt the area around my eyes, and sure enough, there were zits. One protruding out of my upper left eyelid, another nestled into the corner of my right eye. In fact, now that I was paying attention, I realized that when I blinked, I couldn't close my right eye all the way. I drove straight home. It was one of those drives that seems to last forever. It was like when I was a little kid getting sent home from school early for misbehaving, and I would sit in the back seat waiting for my mom or dad to chew me out in uncomfortable silence. Except this time I was all alone. After I pulled the car into the driveway, I turned off the engine, I Googled and called around, and started trying to set up a dermatologist appointment as soon as I possibly could. Eventually I found a doctor that could see me the next morning at 5 a.m. After I set it up, I just sat in the car for a few minutes thinking, God, what will I tell Mom and Dad when they get home? What will they think of me? Maybe this was a silly thing of me to think. They were my parents. Of course they would support me and try to help. But I guess part of me didn't want to see them look at me with the same look of disgust everyone else had. It was around 1 o'clock when I got out of the car. I realized that I hadn't eaten all day, so I went to the kitchen and started making myself a peanut butter sandwich. I didn't have the energy to make anything else. As I sat down and took a bite, I felt a sharp pain in my mouth. I rushed over to the bathroom to take a look in the mirror. The zits had spread from my left cheek past the center of my face and were starting to invade the right side. But that wasn't the cause of the pain. Pimples had begun to grow on my lips, not just around my mouth area, but on my lips in my mouth. It seemed like they were made of the same sensitive skin as lips, and were raw-looking, almost swollen. One of them, one of the ones on the inside of my mouth, seemed to have popped. I think it grew a little too tall, and when I went to take a bit of the sandwich, I must have bitten down on the pimple. I wiped the pus off of the inside of my lip, wincing in pain a bit. I went back to my sandwich, taking special care to keep my lips far out of the path of my teeth. Slowly chewed through the bread until I was left with one final piece. But as I scarfed it down, a little piece of the bread got caught in my throat. Made sense. I was so afraid of biting my lip, I must have not chewed it up properly. It wasn't big enough to choke me, it just went down the wrong pipe. I went to the bathroom sink to try and cough it up. But it wouldn't budge. I tried hacking it up or washing it down with water, but nothing seemed to work. In fact, it felt like it was getting worse. It was getting harder to breathe, and I was starting to panic. Eventually, I decided to shove a finger down my throat to try and make myself gag it up. But the moment my finger brushed up against a smooth lump of skin lodged just within my reach, I realized what was really happening. The zits were starting to grow on the inside of my throat, and they were big, and getting even bigger. As I felt around the inside of my throat, I realized that there were more. Lots more. Gagging, I pulled my finger from my throat, retching and coughing. I tried to catch my breath, but I couldn't get enough air. I was being strangled from the inside, and it wouldn't be long before I couldn't breathe at all. I started crying in fear. I didn't know what to do. I was dying. I had one last reckless hope in the back of my mind. A knife. I need a knife. I threw open the bathroom door and ran to the kitchen. I frantically rummaged in the drawer before my fingers curled around the handle of a small knife. I tried to breath out, but I found I couldn't. The pimples had grown into my nostrils, blocking off all air entirely. My throat was blocked off too. I sprinted back to bathroom, clutching the knife. I hastily stood myself in front of the mirror and opened my mouth as wide as I could, so wide it hurt. I saw the wall of flesh that formed at the back of my throat. As my head started to spin, I reached the knife into my mouth and started cutting. The blade punctured the wall of pimples like a tomato. The pimples burst immediately, gushing pus into my throat. The pain was immense and unbearable. I instinctively recoiled and tried to pull the knife from my mouth, but I cut a deep wound into the roof of my mouth. But I wasn't done yet. I had to keep cutting. I sliced deeper, cutting away the zits crowding the walls of my throat, indiscriminately annihilating everything in my path. I choked and cried and screamed against the vile soup of blood and pus and saliva gathering in my gullet. I started to pass out as I felt the blade stab through my Adam's apple. But the last thing I remember is that I just kept cutting. I woke up in the hospital a few days later. Miraculously, I had survived. Mom had come home early and found me bleeding out on the bathroom floor and had immediately rushed me to the hospital. I have stayed in that hospital for 3 months now. The doctors have no explanation for what has happened to me. The best explanation they have is that it must be some sort of genetic defect. They say that it's probably not actually acne, that it instead might be some bizarre form of cancer. They've tried everything to fix it. They thoroughly scrub my face multiple times a day, which usually hurts. They've tried injecting me with all sorts of drugs, but none of them work. I can't stand it when my family and friends comes to visit. I don't like seeing them cringe in horror at my condition. I haven't been able to speak since cutting into my throat, and sometimes that makes me feel relieved. Yesterday they told me that the growths in the back of my throat are starting to reform. They said that they didn't feel that it was safe to surgically remove them due to the damage my throat has already sustained. So tomorrow morning, they're going to put in a breathing tube. I don't know what I'm going to do,